Welcome, everybody. My name is Justin. I am a son of God and an addict and the host of the RECO12 speaker meeting. And thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts, I'm living the relative, happy, joyous, and free life that is promised to those living in recovery and have been very active in the rooms of recovery since September of 2013. Welcome to the 126th meeting of RECO12. RECO12 is an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addiction of all kinds and the similarities of recovery from all afflictions and addictions, and gaining and sharing those tools and hope from others who are trudging this road. We are an open meeting for all, no matter your life experiences, faith traditions, nationality, or background. To learn more about RECO12, please go to www.reco12.com. That's RECO12.com, and learn more there. RECO12 appreciates your help in keeping us working our 12th step and are grateful to receive donations to cover Zoom and podcast overhead costs. I will put the link and the information as to how to donate to that in the chat of the live meeting, as well as in the show notes of the podcast. If RECO12 is a meaningful tool for you in your recovery walk, please consider rating and reviewing in the podcast platform if you're using, and also sharing it with your recovery networks or anywhere you may be. We look forward each week to receiving from the light reflected by our speakers from their higher power. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. I'm excited and honored to have this week's guest, Herb K., join us. Today, he will be speaking to us on the topic of the best kept secret, not cured, and daily reprieve. Now, here's a little bit more about Herb. Herb was given the gift of freedom from alcohol on February 21st, 1984. As the result of the application of the 12 steps is contained precisely in the AA Big Book, he experienced a profound spiritual awakening in 1988. Since then, he has been very involved in carrying the message of recovery through presentations, facilitating workshops, and leading retreats. He's authored 3 really good books on recovery, and we'll put information on that in the chat of the live meeting and in the show notes. Many have found these books helpful for accessing the instructions and confirming the process contained in the Big Book for experiencing and sustaining a spiritual awakening. Herb is widowed, has 3 adult children, 7 grandchildren, and lives in Rancho, Palos, Verdes, California. His personal journey includes 7 years in seminary, a graduate's education in psychology, and a 40-plus year in human resources consulting, from which he retired in November of 2006. Take it away, Herb. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Justin. A very gracious introduction, and I'm very happy to be here. My name is Herb, and I am an alcoholic. Justin confirmed my sobriety date, February 21st, 1984. It's a story for a different day, a total accident by external observation, certainly. I went to support my wife's recovery in her attempt to deal with her addiction. She went into a hospital February 10th, and when I got acquainted with their program, they suggested, number 1, I stop drinking, and number 2, that I bring the family to their recovery program 3 nights a week. And I stopped drinking on February 21st to support her recovery, and I haven't had a drink nor an inclination to drink ever since. A pure gift. I didn't go to Alcoholics Anonymous for another couple months because I didn't know that there was such a thing and or that I had such a problem. But my process is one of a very, 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 very gradual, glacially slow awakening. And once I went to AA, I understood some aspects of alcoholism and recovery. I got a big book and I read it. I got a sponsor. I worked the steps on my own. I went to meetings every day, called my sponsor every day. I say it that way because that's the checkoff list to become a good member of a 12-step fellowship. Since then, I've met a man in 1988 who introduced me to the Big Book in a way that I had never experienced it before, a precise application of the suggestions in the Big Book. Excuse me. And as a result of having that journey through the steps out of the big book with a mechanic, he was a big book step mechanic. I had a spiritual awakening, which I now understand in retrospect as a change in the way I think and feel and behave. And it was done to me, a mystery. We call it grace or God. Doesn't matter what you call it. I can observe it. I do not understand it. And it was done to me, not by me, but not without me. A change. That's the key here. I had studied to be a Catholic priest for 7 years in a monastery. I left and hung up my black robe and didn't meditate for another 25 years because I didn't find what I was looking for. I studied psychology. I turned around after finishing my graduate work because I didn't find what I was looking for. Therapy, the same thing. Human development, the same thing. One of my good friends, I was joking with Justin as we were introducing ourselves, calls me a mad dog seeker. It's a high compliment, by the way. It's not a pejorative statement. And I just knew I had this deep, deep, deep yearning, and something was missing. I didn't know what that was, and I knew I was a seeker, and I was very happy to be a seeker. I wore it as a badge of superiority, unfortunately, early on. And then when I did this work, I discovered I was a finder. Much better to be a finder. Good to be a seeker, much better to be a finder. And as the result of doing this work 3 different times over the next 10 years, with 3 different step guides, I call them, mechanics with the big book and the step work, the application on a personal basis. And each one of them gave me a different flavor, a different look, and a different experience with different aspects. That's a story for a different day. But I concluded at the end of that journey, 1996, that that this process is a method for human conversion, human transformation, human change, a methodology that will apply to certainly Alcoholics Anonymous and any variation of that for substance addiction, drugs and food, but also Al-Anon discovered that early on, 1951, when Lois started it, to apply the 12 steps to the process addiction. And then it burgeoned from there to probably over 100 different 12-step fellowships. So my second book is entitled 12 Steps to Spiritual Awakening, Enlightenment for Everyone. Because addiction is a problem. The big book is quite clear on that. It's just not the problem. It's a problem, but it's not the problem. Bill said, in fact, addiction, I'll modify the vocabulary. Addiction is a symbol and a symptom of the problem, that the real problem is a spiritual malady. And that was if you're familiar with the AA history, what Carl Jung had written to Bill Wilson in 1960-61. He said, alcoholics, probably we could use the word addicts, are uniquely spiritual people. They have this deep hunger, this deep thirst for the spirit, capital S, and they get distracted by spirits with a small s. A wonderful play on words if you see alcohol as spirits. And he had a wonderful Latin phrase at the end of that letter, spiritus contra spiritu. Simply put, the spirit, capital S, is the antidote to spirits. The immaterial spirit is the antidote to the materiality that we mistake for the sources of our personal and human satisfaction. Pascal said it the best, the whole in us is in the shape of God. So this process is about finding a connection to and a relationship with power, a relationship with God as we understand it. The book says, I much prefer language like the God that we don't understand. Well, I don't pretend to, and I don't even want to, and I know it's not possible. Whatever this reality is, if it is, and I believe it is, and I act as if it's true, those faith and hope steps of steps 2 and 3, faith being my decision, my choice in step 2, and hope being my decision in step 3, connected to action. The difference is both are the same in terms of the use of my free will. I choose to believe. That's my faith. But there's no action connected to it necessarily. That's why step 3 is an action step, in the sense that it's a prayer, certainly a very modest action, but it's a commitment to steps 4 through 9. 4 through 9, the deflation of the ego at depth. Harry Tiebout, a psychiatrist that was very supportive to Bill Wilson, said, Bill got it right. The first 9 steps are for the deflation of the ego at depth. It does that. And then Harry Tiebout, the psychiatrist, said, but the ego has an uncanny way of regenerating itself. If you read the description of what I hope to talk about today, what I am talking about today is about unmanageability. The best kept secret in the rooms, because Bill didn't structure the big book to give a complete, clear approach to step 1. He finished his approach to step 1 on page 43, which is the finish of his conversation about addiction. The doctor's opinion is about the body problem, the allergy, the craving. Bill's commentary from pages 23 to 43 is about the mind problem, obsession, and delusion. And at the end of page 43, he said, there'll come a time I'm paraphrasing, there'll come a time and a place where we'll have no effective mental defense. He launches into step 2. He essentially, in a formal structural way, ignored unmanageability. And yet, the phraseology of step 1 is perfect. Admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Substitute the word addiction. And the big book is very clear, there's only 2 criteria for addiction. Oh, there's lots of description and there's lots of drama and there's lots of differences in terms of outcome. But underneath, there's only 2. Number 1, when you start, you cannot stop. The body problem. And number 2, when you stop, intending to stop, and have some success in stopping, you don't stay stopped. The mind problem. The obsession that hijacks us. That takes possession of us without our permission and without our consciousness. I'm not going to go deep into that. But that's a startling and overwhelming experience when you digest what the implications of that means. I have free will that makes me human, but I don't have free will with regard to addiction when I put it in me. And I don't have free will even when I don't have it in me. I have the guillotine of addiction hanging over my head that could drop at any time, and I don't have any control over the button. I spent about 24 to 48 hours in abject terror when I first had that experience. But at 10 years of sobriety, a man introduced me to a set-aside attitude and a set-aside prayer, similar to the one that Justin opened our time with. And he introduced me to unmanageability. I'm not going to do a teaching on that. You can pursue it by looking at page 52, those bedevilments. Well, that's the term in the paragraph, the second paragraph on page 52 in the big book. It's a behavioral description. This is what unmanageability looks like. It's in chapter 4. Bill unpacked it. He just didn't have it structurally set up in the big book. Chapter 4 is in about step 2. Chapter 5 is at the beginning about step 3. And in that chapter 5, pages 60 to 62, he describes the exact nature of unmanageability. Now, he doesn't use the terminology, but this man helped me hook it together. The behavioral description so that I can see, do I feel this way? Do I behave this way? Having trouble with personal relations, etc. He said, use the personal pronoun in present tense. I mean, really, mark your book. Present tense, personal pronoun. I am having trouble with personal relationships. 1994, 10 years sober, wanting a divorce from a 25-year marriage. Yeah. And I went through all of them. They weren't all on a scale of 1 to 10. They weren't all a 10. There were some 2s and 3s. But I got a technicolor picture of the spiritual malady, restless, irritable, and discontent. Especially when I read pages 60 to 62 and saw the self-centeredness that Bill captures at the top of page 62. Selfishness dash self-centeredness, exclamation point. There's not even a verb. And at the end of that second paragraph, he says, and we can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on our own power. In the same way he ended the discussion on addiction on page 43, he ends the discussion on unmanageability by at least my standards and evaluation on page 62. We can't even reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. Bam, we need to have God's help. Then I was wonderfully and effectively launched into steps 2 and 3. Again, a story for a different day. But the 2 questions that opened the curtain for me: 10 years sober, having been a monk for 7 years, 7 years of silence, if I didn't mention that. 10 years sober, having done the steps twice with really good people and had deep and effective and broad spiritual awakenings previously twice, but never had an experience with steps 2 and 3. Didn't know that I didn't know. Couldn't see that I didn't see. And the 2 questions that pulled the curtain back for me on my agnosticism. What do you actually believe? Very safe question for me, who had to pretend that he was a theologian and philosopher because of my background. It was pretense. I didn't know that I didn't know. But then he asked me, once I wrote that out and read it to him, to write out an answer to the second question. How do you behave in light of what you believe you believe? Wow, it was embarrassing. Self-reliance just popped out. Pages 60 to 62 in terms of that egocentric behavior and the self-reliance and the manipulation. It was so embarrassing. I thought I was a Renaissance man. I turned out to be a Neanderthal. But I didn't know it until I saw it. Again, a process like the dimmer switch. When I look back over my shoulder, the dimmer switch went on February 21st, 1984. Very light voltage, very little light. But as I stayed gently pressed up against it, I hope you get the image. Gently pressed up against the dimmer switch over the next 10 years, pushing it forward a click at a time, the lights got brighter and brighter and brighter. And the good news is there's more light. Of course, the bad news is there's more light. And therefore, you see what you weren't able to see before. But it's therapeutic, of course. Now, here's the best kept secret. What I just said about unmanageability and the powerlessness of living our lives. Justin had mentioned the words we hear all the time, and we get so brain dead to them. Happy, joyous, and free. I mean, free of our addiction is guaranteed by the first 9 steps. Read page 84. Placed in a position of neutrality. There's no other interpretation of that. Placed, grace, in a position of neutrality. We're not fighting it. We're not resisting it. It's just not relevant anymore. And then he says, in the big book, we're not cured. Of what? He doesn't tell us. But my connection and interpretation is we're not cured of our unmanageability because that's the human condition. The first half of the first step is a percentage of people, 10%, 50%, I don't care. I don't know the statistics, and I don't think anybody has any real valid statistics about addiction. But it's a percentage. Unmanageability, on the other hand, that's 100%. All human beings, we have maybe 8 billion in the world. Every one of them, single individual, has unmanageability built into our structure. At least this is my interpretation. Selfishness, self-centeredness, it's an observation, it's not a condemnation. We're built to survive. We have instincts, fight, flight, and freeze, that try to ensure our survival. And of course, many, a good highly percentage of the people don't go through the rite of passage to adulthood and assume responsibility for self-regulation. That's the point, and that's the problem. Unmanageability, selfishness, self-centeredness. I'm the center of my universe. That's emotional sobriety. I'm the center of the universe. That's narcissism. That extreme pathological, actually. Not everybody has it, but read those 9 characteristics of narcissism in like an inventory. Challenge yourself. It won't be on a scale of 1 to 10. Most of you won't be 10s. You're not in prison or in psychiatric units. But 1 out of, on a scale of 1 to 10, you'll calibrate. Unmanageability, and we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve. Bill says we grow in understanding and effectiveness in that same area. Pages 84, 85, extremely dense material. You almost have to take it word and phrase by phrase and unpack it, and then do it more than once and meditate on it. We enter the world of the spirit. What does that mean? No, he says it. After the 9th step, the promises, wonderful list, we enter the world of the spirit. Where the hell have we been? Oh, steps 1 through 9, the world of self. The turning that's committed to and promised in step 3. Read the promises at the top of page 63. Wonderful step 3 promises. A commitment to action. That's why I do believe he uses the term decision there. A decision without action is fantasy. A decision without action is fantasy. I didn't get that from me. That came from my own sponsor. He was using it against me, actually. When I told him I was willing, and he said, well, how are you doing? I said, well, I don't have time. He said, well, decision without action is fantasy. So it's a wisdom saying, though, and it's confrontive. That's the whole point. You can finish your 4th step. You can finish your 5th step. You can finish your 9th step. Might take some time, and it might take some creative interpretation, some spiritual evaluation, but I finish my 9th step every time I've done the step work, which is 4 times over a 20-year period. Not cured. Daily reprieve. Oh. Step 10, thank God for the 12 and 12, because it really clarifies the use of step 10. And you hear a lot of misinformation in meetings. Well, by my standards, my interpretation, it's not gospel. It's just my interpretation, my understanding. But the 12 and 12 said, it's a spiritual axiom. Whenever we're disturbed, there's something wrong with me. Now, I really was able to get that and apply that and accept that once I did a 4th step out of the big book. And it uses the term spot check inventory, step 10, a spot check inventory. So we're not doing step 10 at night. We're not doing step 10 in writing. Spot check, on the spot. When I'm disturbed, it's kind of like that radar sweep. When you have a radar sweep like this, there's a blip on the screen. Oh, it's kind of like sitting in your car looking at the yellow light. Low oil. Tire pressure needs adjusting. Something mechanical is failing. Yellow light, yellow light, yellow light. It's not bad news. It's just news. It's a warning. It's a signal. It's the thermostat that tells us something's amiss. And Bill says it in the big book very clearly. Watch for. Step 10 is about vigilance. Watch for resentment and fear and dishonesty and selfishness. Those are the five, there's three ingredients in chapter 4. The step 4. Step 4, resentment and fear and sex. When I see sex under the mantle of dishonesty, fight, flight, and freeze, fight, anger, resentment, flight, fear, anxiety, freeze, camouflage, dishonesty. And that was the major theme of my sex inventory, hiding my motives. But the broader tent that captures, I do believe, this instinct in us as human beings that's gone awry because of my immaturity and my selfishness is dishonesty, hiding, camouflage. And then selfishness, of course, is the root. Resentment and fear and sex and dishonesty are the fruits of the root. The selfishness and self-centeredness is the root, so we need to get to the root. If those are bedevilments on page 52, which is the behavior, then this process is about exorcism. Not a word used in the book, and I don't mean it in a religious connotation. Bill does say it's soul surgery. Soul surgery, removing the cancers in us that block the light and power available to us. That's why I like the image of the dimmer switch and darkness and light. He says in step 10, we pray. I interpret that as I'm powerless. We talk to somebody. I interpret because I'm a human being. Confession, disclosure, fifth step, therapy. Those are all recognizing human nature's need for that kind of disclosure. We make amends. If I'm disturbed, I'm sure as hell going to be disturbing somebody, but not all the time. And we turn our thoughts to helping somebody else. Brilliant psychology on Bill's part. He doesn't actually say that we help anybody. He says we turn our thoughts to helping somebody, knowing that at some point we'll go into action. But that right now I'm in work, I'm at my community, I'm at my family, and it may not be appropriate to actually leave your current responsibility to take care of this disturbance. Step 11 is my favorite step. Don't have enough time to talk about it deeply. You can go to my YouTube channels. I've got many, many presentations, 1 hour long to 3-4 hour long on meditation. But the key is not in the big book. It was in this man who took me through the steps, who wasn't trained, but who had had an experience with the 11th step. Upon awakening, it says in the big book, we ask God to direct our thinking. This man said that's a prayer. Anytime you're talking to God, it goes like this. God, please direct my thinking. Yeah, really, that's simple. The big book says then we begin thinking about the 24 hours ahead, considering our plans. I make up a decision as to what that means. That's not the point. The point is, then the man said, so we ask God to direct our thinking. God, please direct my thinking. Then we begin thinking like the big book says. Then this is the key that unlocked the door for me to be consistent in a meditation practice since 1988. He said, then we listen to our thinking as the medium of the message. I've never heard God speak to me audibly through my ears. I hear the inspiration, the intuition, the instinct. And that's what Bill talks about in his description of meditation, pages 85 to 88. Read it, highlight it, outline it. It's very outlineable, what to do at night, what to do in the morning, what to do all day long. It's about improving consciousness. There's only one reason for step 11, and it's not biology. It's not psychology. It's not sociology. Those are wonderful and now scientifically established benefits of meditation, but it's just not step 11.
A higher consumption of vegetables may cut your odds of developing depression by as much as 62%. An American Cancer Society study found that women who sit for more than 6 hours a day have a 40% higher death rate. Hi, my name is Maya Acosta, and I'm a health and wellness educator and host of the Healthy Lifestyle Solutions podcast. Join me and the amazing people that I get to talk to as I set out to learn how to improve our quality of life and increase our longevity. You can listen at the Healthy Lifestyle Solutions podcast or at healthylifestylesolutions.org.
And step 11 isn't about quieting your mind. It's about regulating your mind. It's about directing your thoughts. Listening to your thoughts as the possibility of God speaking to me. Through my own, he says, use your brains. The proper use of your mind is to think. The proper use of your will is to be in alignment. My word for step 3. A commitment to be in alignment, to do steps 4 through 9 in order to place myself in alignment with reality. I actually don't like the words God's will, but I do like the word alignment with reality. And step 10 is that major tool of emotional sobriety, to be in alignment when I'm out of alignment. If I'm out of alignment, the radar sweep will say you're disturbed. Get back in alignment with step 10. In the morning, get direction and guidance. In the evening, check it out. How did you do? Another radar sweep. And then live by principles. The key to the 12-step process is to identify the principles. I'm glad that Bill didn't give us a list of principles. It's up to us to figure it out. What are the principles of reality? If we live in alignment with the principles, we will thrive happy, joyous, and free. If we are out of alignment with the principles of reality, they will crush us. We will suffer and then we will die. I'm not concerned about dying, but I don't like suffering. So I try to stay in alignment. Thanks, Justin.
Oh, thank you so much, Herb. Love that. I burned my pen out, taking notes and writing questions. And a reminder to our live audience here, if you have a question for Herb, please type it in the Q&A link at the bottom of your window. Looks like 2 speech bubbles over the top of each other. We'll get to those. We have a couple of questions that have come in, both related to your the topic of narcissism. So the first one, Herb, and I also had this question because as I was writing, I missed something. You talked about how my universe versus the universe. If I'm the center of my universe, I'm this. If I'm the center of the universe, I'm narcissistic. Can you repeat that
Sure.
concept real quick?
Sure. One of my co-facilitators is a Dr. Alan Berger, and he really started me on the journey of looking at emotional sobriety. He's a clinical psychologist, and he talks about the center of our gravity deep down inside ourselves. The center of our gravity deep down inside ourselves, so that I am the center of my universe. I am responsible. Melody Beattie, in her book Codependent No More, talks about the antidote to codependency is independence of the individual and the interdependence between individuals. I am an island. I am responsible. I am solid in myself, in my relationship with myself and my relationship with the universe. But I am not the center of the universe, meaning as a narcissist, I'm a recovering narcissist, anyway. And up until I did the step work where I was asleep, dreaming that I was awake, I plagiarized from Gurdjieff here, a philosopher, Russian philosopher. He said, most human beings are asleep, dreaming that they're awake. At that point, age 48, I was the center of my universe. I was an unconscious narcissist, that everybody around me was planets around the sun. And if they got hurt, that was collateral damage because I was getting what I wanted. That's what I mean by that.
Love it. So if I'm the center of my universe, that's responsibility. I'm taking responsibility. If I'm the center of the universe, that's narcissism.
Right.
Love it.
Right.
Thank you. All right. And another question on narcissism. This comes from an anonymous attendee. As a chronic codependent, I have asked myself the question, am I a narcissist? Many a time. And it terrifies me because from my understanding, narcissists can't and won't change. My therapist has said everyone has narcissistic traits. It's about recognizing them and keeping them in check. What are your views?
I would agree with the therapist there. And actually, Dr. Berger was my therapist at one point early on in my recovery. And he said, narcissism is irremediable. It can't be fixed by therapy and or medication. Well, that's a condemnation of the major kind. It's powerless. And yet, when I met him 10 years after I had done the step work, he acknowledged that it had been mitigated by the spiritual practice, by the spiritual power. If I was a 7.5 on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm a 2.5 at that point, never cured, but mitigated to a point where I can self-regulate. I can manage it. I just need to stay conscious of it. So I 100% agree with the comments that your therapist made to you, and yet there's hope because there's how big is your God? How big is this power? I love the word and have been recently using it in my meditation to give it some strength, and that is the darkness to the light. I come from darkness. And I've been placed in the light. I've been placed in the light. That's the grace. But I'm looking for the light, and I'm willing to take the action to pull the curtains back progressively. I mean, there's infinite number of curtains, and they're constantly opening up, and I'm constantly going, oh, wow, look at that. Or I'm going, oh, wow, look at that. And, it's kind of like, sometimes it's embarrassing and sometimes it's very enjoyable. But it's a journey, and Bill says it. He captured it. Progress for the rest of our life. Progress.
Love it, and that concept of pulling back the curtains, to me, that's analogous to the dimmer switch you talked about a little.
100%. 100%. Just a different way of looking, a different picture.
Yeah. So in your life, as you pulled back the curtains, as that dimmer switch has gradually become brighter and brighter, what is something recently that has been revealed in that thing that you have had to look internally and say, oh yeah, here's something I need to address or change or improve on here after, since 1984, since sober?
Yeah. I was introduced, somebody gave me a book by a rabbi, Rami Shapiro, who is in a 12-step program. I mean, he's disclosed it in his own books. And the book's name was Loving Kindness. And just a year ago, I read the book and I decided that those were the two lenses that I was going to look through at other people, especially, but at reality outside myself, with loving kindness. And so that's been my theme. That's been my effort. But I didn't have that level of focus and or consciousness prior to that until I was introduced to those terms. Now, we hear it all the time in the book, of course, love and tolerance is our code, but it didn't have the same snap. So when a curtain parts, the words we hear all the time become meaningful.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I love that, and we'll put that information in the show notes of the podcast. Okay, so another question came in from our live audience. Liana would ask if you could address the topic of relapse really quick. Is that something you're willing to talk on for a second?
Oh, sure, I would. I'm going to take just a pause for a minute, though, and go back to the narcissism. There's a therapist in Minneapolis named Raquel Lerner, Raquel, Rokelle, Lerner, Lerner, and she wrote a book with a great title, The Object of My Affection is in My Reflection. Subtitle, How to Live with a Narcissist. Very worthwhile reading. for those of you who are living with and or just wanted sort of a real lay person's, but a psychologist's interpretation of narcissism and how to deal with it, others and or yours. Relapse. It's not my experience, so I can't talk about it from experience, but I have worked with literally hundreds and thousands of people now through my workshops. And so it's an experience. There are psychologists and recovery specialists who can talk about relapse prevention. And it's legitimate because we're human beings and we need to know about some of the practical applications of human development. I don't come at it from that standpoint. You want relapse prevention, do the first 9 steps. If you haven't experienced the first 9 steps, you probably will relapse. I mean, finishing the 9th step. The big book, as I mentioned in my conversation, confirms on page 84 that we will be placed in a position of neutrality. If you're not in a position of neutrality, there's something amiss with your first 9 steps. If you've done the first 9 steps and you feel that it's been adequate and complete and you relapse, then there's something amiss with your 10, 11, and 12. It's really clear to me. We're screwed on our own power. We need to have an effective relationship with power, which we cannot get by doing anything. And yet, we cannot get it if we don't do something. There's the conundrum. It's almost like a catch-22, and yet that's the mystery. My willingness to take action connected to grace, knowing that my willingness to take action is it grace itself. I can't explain it. I took it into meditation. I was willing to be taken to a place. All right. I was taken to a place. Hear the grace and the willingness. I was taken to a place I didn't know existed. Grace. I was willing to take the action. That's my part, my role. I can't again explain how that works. It's alchemy, which is a pseudoscience of turning iron ore into gold from the medieval snake oil salesman that existed forever. It's not true. Of course, you can't do that. And yet here we experience it. It's like spiritual math. Regular math, 1 + 1 = 2. Spiritual math, 1 + 1 = 5. I've been taken to a place I didn't know existed. I've been taken to a place I couldn't get to on my own. And here's the really, really, really profound good news. The outcome is geometrically bigger than my contribution to it. The outcome of happy, joyous, and free is geometrically larger than my contribution to it. That's what grace is from my standpoint.
Yeah, thank you so much, Herb. Good stuff. All right, the next question comes from Gregory, and this touches on something that you and I talked about before we started recording a little bit. Gregory says, your book title mentions spiritual awakening for everyone.
Yes.
How do you see non-addicts taking step 1?
Oh, unmanageability. That's real clear. The addiction part is the first half of the first step. Unmanageability is the human condition. And everybody, there's not a person alive that couldn't relate to pages 60 to 62. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very helpful. All right, we have a question from Martine from Belgium. Martine says, do you do any recorded concepts workshops? Yes. So can you tell us a little bit about where we can find some of your workshops and recordings?
You can find them all on my YouTube channel. I've had a support person who has organized it, established a YouTube channel, and then has like 8 or 9 different playlists. So there's a very robust set of recordings on a variety of topics. Some of them are sequential, like a workshop, weekly workshop for a year. Some of them are just individual workshops that I'll do on a Saturday or a Sunday for an hour or to 4 hours. Those are usually my workshops.
Yeah, and I've got the link to your YouTube channel here in the chat of the live meeting. I'll also put that in the show notes of the podcast. So thank you for sharing that.
And on my website, I have a library of resources, all downloadable for free, that support the work out of the big book and the step process.
Very good. I'll make sure that there's a link to your website also in those areas. All right. Next question is also from Gregory. In step 11 discussion, you mentioned to pray to ask God to direct our thinking, then to think and listen to the thinking. What does that look like in your life?
Yeah. And I've expanded it. My step 11 is broader than is anticipated in the big book. So prayer is, I start my morning practice is usually about a 30-minute time allotment. I don't have a timer now that I'm not working, and my schedule is much less burdened with rigor. I start with the set-aside prayer, some form of it. Holy Spirit, release me from up till now. Detach me from after now, and allow me to be fully present in the now. That's the one I can remember anyway. And then I say the third step prayer, some version of the third step prayer, normally the one from the book, as a recommitment to my life of consciousness. And then I use the step 11 meditation practice, looking for guidance for the day, 5 or 10 minutes, whatever that might look like. I don't time it. It's just I've been doing it since 1988 on a daily basis now. I have a nice habit, a conscious connection, or an effort at it. And then a year after I did the work out of the big book, I was introduced to a priest, a monk, Thomas Keating. His book is Open Mind, Open Heart. And he reintroduced me to the contemplative practice, a very different practice than meditation. What many people think is meditation. Contemplation comes from the Latin templare, meaning temple space. So I sit in the presence of the divine for 15 or 20 minutes, like you would getting a suntan. How much work is that? You sit in the presence of the sun, you get tanned. I sit in the presence of the God I don't understand so that I am transformed. Without thinking about it, without feeling about it, it's just aware of that presence. And it's not that clean, but I'm just giving you a simple answer to your question. And then I wrap it with the 7-step prayer, which I've been toying with changing to make it a little more relevant to me and maybe a little more current in its language. And we might even use that at the end of our time together today. Because of the last line in the 7-step prayer, as I go out from here to do your bidding. That's a great launching pad for me. So I start with prayer, I move into meditation, I go into my contemplative quiet, sit, and then I come out with a prayer that launches me into my actions for the day. Now, is it that clean? And no. It weaves and wanders, and I get distracted with some things that are not so spiritual. And then I smile and I laugh at myself.
Love it. And I love how you've implemented all these recovery prayers into that process and edited them as need be, or a version that works out for you. I think that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And another question here. How do you sponsor today? How do you lead people through the steps? Is it fast, slow? How do you do that today?
Mm-hmm. Great question. And yes, fast and slow. Dr. Berger, again, coming from his psychological training, taught me, meet them where they're at. Meet them where they're at. So I have a set of assignments that are very rigorous. Do I lay that on No. Do I lay that on a person with 30 years of sobriety who actually has no real information about the big book? No. I give young in recovery pablum, and you build it up to meat and potatoes. And so Wally P has a great approach with his back to basics. He gets them into the steps in a day or a weekend and gets them through the steps. Wonderful. What a panoramic view and an introduction to the process and some of the vocabulary. But anybody who goes through the steps in a day or a weekend or a week or a month, quite frankly, as good as it is, it won't be substantive long term. The process I usually use, depending on the person and or the opportunity, takes anywhere from 6 months to 2 years to go through the steps. Yes, I know. In the history, they did it in a day or two or a week or two. Yeah, I know. That's the basis of Wally P's work. It's great. We talked about relapse. Unless you have a deep understanding of and experience with this process, it won't last. And so I modify my approach in helping other people based on what they can do and what they will do. And it's the same approach with prayer and meditation. What can they do? What will they do? I sit for 30 minutes. I don't ask people to do that. Can you sit for 1 minute listening to your thinking? Intentional consciousness for 1 minute. Oh, that's not enough. Oh, well, it's a minute longer than you're doing right now. Yeah.
Love it. One more question before we get to wrapping things up. So you mentioned earlier on that you've been called a mad dog seeker, and that's a term of honor. And for a while, you wore it as a badge of honor. Like, look at me, I'm a mad dog seeker, and it turned into a finder. What changed there, or how did that change?
Mm-hmm. In 1988, I went through the steps for the very first time, and especially the step one where I saw the doctor's opinion, I began to understand what addiction was. But the more potent experience was in step 4 in the resentment inventory, column 4, in which I saw that I wasn't a victim, that in fact I was the perpetrator. I don't have a part in my resentments. I have 100%. That was a transformative experience. And then that was coupled with the sex inventory for the very first time, answering those 9 questions on page 69, especially the last one. What should I have done instead? I discovered that I actually have principles that I wasn't using, and that I didn't have some principles that I would want to have if I were going to be a decent human being. So I began to wake up to the fact that I was that Neanderthal rather than the Renaissance man of my delusion. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Herb. All right, before we wrap things up, do you have any final words of wisdom for us before we jump into that wrap up?
Yeah, find somebody who understands the process, understands it out of the big book, really understands it, not just mouthing it, but understands it, and themselves have had an experience. It may not be mine, of course, it will be theirs. But make sure they have an understanding and an experience with doing the steps, and then ask them to help you go through the steps. That will be the beginning of an awakening that then you will incorporate on your own and find a path and teachers that will help you navigate that path. The Buddhists talk about 3 things that are necessary for anybody who is seeking to awaken. Number 1 is a path, of course, but a teacher to guide us, and then a community to support us. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Thanks, Herb. That was a great RECO12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. Please consider joining our WhatsApp group and participate in our community, asking questions and answering others' questions that may come up. If you've not yet rated and reviewed the podcast in Apple Podcasts, please go consider doing so now. It's a great way to help us continue working our Step 12. I invite the audience to come back next week when we will be hearing from Susie W., whose topic will be a good one. She's preparing that now, and we'll have that out and announced by Wednesday. Now let's launch off into the rest of our day with the emotional sobriety prayer that Herb will be sharing with us and saying for us.
Oh, thank you. It's a adaptation of step 7 as recently as this morning, fine-tuning it. I call it the prayer for healing. God, I am now willing that you have all of me, healthy and unhealthy. I ask that the inclinations and behaviors that stand in the way of my usefulness to you and my helpfulness to others be removed. Grant me knowledge and power, wisdom and courage, so that I can live in alignment with reality as it truly is. Amen.
Amen. Keep coming back, everybody. Come trudge this happy road with me. Work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching